What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected actresses sits down for what should be a routine interview and ends up in the most explosive confrontation ever witnessed on daytime television? Today we're breaking down the shocking moment when Meryl Streep completely dismantled Joy Behar live on The View, leaving the entire studio in stunned silence. This is the kind of raw, unfiltered television that networks pray never happens. But when it does, it creates television history. Make sure you subscribe and drop a comment below because you're not going to believe how this unfolds. The morning started like any other at The View studios. Meryl Streep had been booked for what the producers thought would be a straightforward promotional interview for her latest film. The Oscar winner, known for her grace and professionalism, settled into the guest chair as the cameras rolled and the theme music faded. Joy Behar, sitting in her usual spot, had that familiar smirk playing across her face. The one regular viewers know means she's preparing to stir the pot. "So, Meryl," Joy began, leaning forward with exaggerated interest. "Tell us about this new movie of yours." I have to say, when I read the synopsis, I was wondering if Hollywood is just running out of original ideas these days. The other hosts, Whoopi Goldberg, Sarah Haynes, and the rest of the panel, exchanged quick glances. It was an unusually sharp opening, even for Joy, who was known for her blunt commentary. Meryl, however, maintained her composure, offering a polite smile. "Well, Joy, I think storytelling has always involved revisiting themes that resonate with human experience," Meryl replied diplomatically. "This particular film explores the complexity of family dynamics during times of crisis, which feels quite relevant given everything families have been through recently." Joy waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, please, Meryl. Let's be honest here. You've made a career out of playing the same tortured woman over and over again. The crying, the dramatic speeches, the whole suffering artist routine. Don't you think audiences are getting tired of watching you cry on screen for 2 hours?" The studio fell noticeably quiet. Even the production crew seemed to pause their usual bustling. Whoopi cleared her throat, clearly uncomfortable with the direction Joy was taking the interview. Sarah looked down at her notes, suddenly finding them fascinating. Meryl's smile didn't waver, but something shifted in her eyes. "That's an interesting perspective, Joy. I'm curious, what would you consider authentic storytelling? Because from where I'm sitting, exploring human emotion and vulnerability seems like exactly what art should do." "Authentic?" Joy scoffed, her voice rising slightly. "Authentic would be admitting that you've been coasting on your reputation for decades. You get nominated for everything because it's Meryl Streep, not because the performances are actually that remarkable anymore. It's like the emperor's new clothes, and everyone's too afraid to say it." The tension in the room was palpable now. Cameras continued to roll as the other hosts sat in stunned silence. This wasn't the playful back and forth that sometimes happened on the show. This felt personal, hostile, and completely unprofessional. Meryl set down the water glass she'd been holding and looked directly at Joy. "I see. So you believe that recognition comes from some sort of industry conspiracy rather than craft and dedication?" Meryl's voice remained steady, but there was steel underneath the politeness. "Tell me, Joy, what's your background in performance? What gives you the authority to make such sweeping judgments about artistic merit?" Joy's face flushed slightly. "I don't need to be a chef to know when food tastes bad, Meryl. And I've been in this business long enough to know manufactured excellence when I see it." "This business?" Meryl repeated, her eyebrows raising slightly. "You mean television hosting? Because acting, real acting, requires a level of vulnerability and skill that I'm not sure you'd understand. It's not about delivering opinions from behind a desk." The other hosts were now actively trying to redirect the conversation. Whoopi jumped in. "Ladies, maybe we should talk about the film itself. The story. The characters." But Joy wasn't backing down. "Oh, here we go with the superiority complex. You think because you have a bunch of awards that you're untouchable? But let me tell you something, sweetheart. I've been calling out Hollywood phonies since before you were doing those ridiculous accents in every other movie." Meryl's composure finally cracked, just slightly. "Phonies? That's rich coming from someone whose entire career is built on manufactured outrage and uninformed commentary. You want to talk about authentic? Let's discuss what's authentic about sitting here every day, spouting opinions about subjects you clearly don't understand, while real artists are out there actually creating something meaningful." The words hung in the air like smoke. Joy's mouth opened and closed, for once seemingly at a loss for her usual quick comeback. The studio audience, which had been murmuring quietly, fell completely silent. Even the camera operators seemed frozen, unsure whether they should keep filming this career-ending moment or cut to commercial. Sarah tried desperately to smooth things over. I think what's wonderful about art is that it means different things to different people, and perhaps— No, Meryl interrupted, her voice calm but firm. I think Joy has made her position quite clear. She believes that expertise, training, and decades of craft mean nothing compared to her personal opinions delivered from a position of comfort and safety. It's fascinating, really, this idea that criticism without understanding equals insight. Joy finally found her voice again, but it came out sharper and more defensive than her usual confrontational tone. Don't you dare lecture me about understanding. I've been watching movies since before you were even thinking about acting. I know what I see, and what I see is someone who thinks she's above criticism. Above criticism? Meryl laughed, but it wasn't a pleasant sound. Joy, I've been criticized by some of the most brilliant minds in film and theater. The difference is, those critics understood what they were evaluating. They could discuss technique, emotional truth, the relationship between text and performance. You're offering nothing but personal attacks disguised as professional commentary. The words hit Joy like a slap across the face. Her cheeks reddened as she realized that Meryl had just publicly dismantled her entire approach to commentary in front of millions of viewers. But instead of backing down or acknowledging the valid point, Joy doubled down in the worst possible way. Personal attacks? Joy's voice cracked slightly as she leaned forward aggressively. You want to talk about personal attacks? Let me tell you what's personal. Watching someone like you parade around Hollywood for 40 years, acting like you're doing Shakespeare when half the time you're just putting on funny voices and calling it acting. You think you're Katharine Hepburn, but honey, you're not even close. The studio was now completely silent, except for the hum of the cameras. Whoopi had her hand pressed to her forehead, clearly regretting every decision that led to this moment. Sarah looked like she wanted to crawl under the desk. The producers in the control room were frantically trying to decide whether this was a disaster or the most compelling television they'd ever captured. Meryl sat back in her chair, and for a moment, everyone thought she might take the high road and simply end the interview. Instead, she folded her hands in her lap and spoke with the kind of quiet intensity that made everyone lean forward to hear. Joy, I'm going to do something for you that clearly no one in your life has had the courage to do. I'm going to tell you the truth. Her voice was steady, but there was fire behind it. You have built a career on being deliberately inflammatory because actual insight requires work, study, and intellectual honesty. You confuse volume with authority and controversy with relevance. Joy's mouth fell open. How dare you? I'm not finished, Meryl continued, her voice cutting through Joy's protest like a knife. You want to compare me to Katharine Hepburn? Fine. Hepburn was fearless, intelligent, and never punched down. She challenged power, not artists trying to do meaningful work. You, on the other hand, have made a living out of cheap shots and surface-level observations. The difference between us isn't just talent, Joy, it's character. The silence that followed was deafening. Joy's face had gone from red to pale, and for the first time in her career on The View, she seemed genuinely speechless. The other hosts were frozen, unsure whether to intervene or let this play out to its inevitable conclusion. Finally, Joy found her voice, but it came out as a strangled whisper. You think you can come on my show and humiliate me? Your show? Meryl's eyebrows shot up. Joy. This is The View. It belongs to all of you, and more importantly, to the viewers who tune in expecting thoughtful discussion, not petty attacks on guests. But since you brought up humiliation, let me ask you this. When was the last time you created anything? When did you last put yourself out there, vulnerable and exposed, for people to judge? Joy's voice grew shrill. I create conversation. I create dialogue. I ask the tough questions that everyone else is afraid to ask. You create conflict. Meryl corrected firmly. There's a difference between tough questions and cheap attacks. A tough question about my work might be about my process, my choices, the themes I'm drawn to. Instead, you opened with insults disguised as observations. That's not journalism, Joy. That's not even good entertainment. It's just cruel. Whoopi finally attempted to regain control. Ladies, I think we need to take a breath here and maybe... But Joy wasn't done. The humiliation of being called out so publicly had pushed her past the point of rational thought. You know what, Meryl? You want to talk about cruel? Cruel is watching someone your age, still trying to play ingenues in movies. Cruel is pretending that every performance you give is some kind of masterpiece, when we can all see you're just doing the same thing over and over with different costumes. The attack was so personal and vicious that even the camera operators looked uncomfortable. Sarah actually gasped audibly. Whoopi shook her head in disbelief. But Meryl, instead of rising to the bait, did something unexpected. She smiled. Thank you, Joy, she said quietly. You've just proven my point better than I ever could have. She turned to look directly into the camera, addressing the audience at home. Ladies and gentlemen, what you're witnessing right now is what happens when someone is confronted with their own limitations. Instead of self-reflection or professional discourse, we get personal attacks about age and appearance. Joy realized she had walked directly into a trap of her own making. I didn't mean... Oh, but you did mean it, Meryl interrupted, turning back to face her. And that tells us everything we need to know about your character and your qualifications to judge anyone else's work. You think attacking a woman's age is clever commentary. You think ageism disguised as criticism makes you edgy and relevant. Joy was now visibly flustered, her usual confidence completely shattered. I've been doing this longer than... Longer doesn't mean better, Joy, Meryl said firmly. It just means you've been making the same mistakes for a longer period of time. And frankly, if this is what you consider professional behavior after all these years, then maybe it's time to reevaluate your approach. The other host sat in stunned silence as Joy struggled to regain her composure. Her face was flushed, her hands were shaking slightly, and for the first time since she'd joined The View, she looked genuinely vulnerable. But instead of evoking sympathy, her previous attacks had burned any goodwill she might have received. Sarah made one more desperate attempt to salvage the interview. Perhaps we could talk about the message of your film, Meryl, and how it relates to current. Actually, Meryl said, standing up from her chair, I think we've covered quite enough for today. Joy has made it clear that she's more interested in personal attacks than professional discussion, and I don't see any point in continuing this conversation. Joy's voice came out as a croak. You can't just leave in the middle of an interview. Meryl paused and looked down at her with something that might have been pity. Joy, you stopped conducting an interview the moment you decided to make this personal. What we have now is just you embarrassing yourself on national television while I try to maintain some semblance of dignity for both of us. The studio was so quiet you could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Meryl stood there, poised and dignified, while Joy sat slumped in her chair, the reality of what had just transpired beginning to sink in. The other hosts looked like they were witnessing a car accident in slow motion, unable to look away but desperately wishing they could. Joy made one last desperate attempt to save face. Fine. Walk away. That's what people like you do when you can't handle real questions. Meryl paused, her hand on the back of her chair, and slowly turned around. The look in her eyes was pure steel. Real questions, Joy? Let me show you what a real question looks like. She sat back down, but on the edge of her seat, leaning forward with laser focus. Here's a real question for you. In all your years of television, can you name one instance where your confrontational approach actually led to meaningful insight or positive change? Joy's mouth opened, but no words came out. The question hung in the air like a challenge that everyone knew she couldn't meet. Here's another one. Meryl continued relentlessly. Can you explain to your viewers why you think personal attacks constitute professional journalism? Because that would be genuinely educational for everyone watching. Whoopi tried to intervene again. Meryl, maybe we should. No, Whoopi, Meryl said firmly, never taking her eyes off Joy. Joy wanted real questions. These are real questions. They're about professional standards, about the responsibility that comes with having a platform. about the difference between challenging people and simply bullying them. Joy finally found her voice, but it came out weak and defensive. I'm not a bully. I ask tough questions. Sometimes people don't like that. There's the problem right there, Meryl said, shaking her head. You think being disliked for asking probing questions is the same as being disliked for being needlessly cruel. They're not the same thing, Joy. One is journalism. The other is just bad behavior with a television contract. The cameras continued rolling as Joy struggled to respond. Her usual quick wit had completely abandoned her, and she looked around the table desperately, hoping one of her co-hosts would come to her rescue. But Sarah was staring at her hands, and Whoopi looked like she was calculating how many more minutes until commercial break. Let me give you an example of the difference, Meryl continued, her voice taking on the tone of a teacher addressing a struggling student. A real question might have been, Meryl, your latest film deals with themes of resilience in the face of adversity. Given your long career, what have you learned about finding truth in difficult emotional territory? That would have been challenging and substantive. Joy tried to interrupt. That's not. Instead, Meryl continued, you chose to open with insults about my career trajectory and suggest that my success is somehow fraudulent. That's not journalism, Joy. That's not even good gossip. It's just mean-spirited noise designed to create conflict rather than understanding. The devastation was complete. Joy looked around the table one more time, but found no support, no lifeline, no way out of the hole she had dug for herself. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was barely above a whisper. I've been doing this for years. I know how to conduct an interview. Meryl's response was swift and final. Joy, knowing how to do something and actually doing it well are two entirely different things. You've been talking for years, but that doesn't mean you've been communicating effectively. There's a difference between having opinions and having insight, between being provocative and being productive. Sarah made one final, desperate attempt to salvage something from the wreckage. I think what's important is that we can have different perspectives and still respect. Respect, Meryl repeated, turning to Sarah with a sad smile. Yes, that's exactly what's been missing here. Respect for the craft, respect for the guest, respect for the audience who tuned in, expecting thoughtful discussion rather than a verbal ambush. Joy's last shred of dignity finally snapped. You think you're so much better than everyone else, don't you? You think your little speeches make you superior? Meryl stood up again. But this time her demeanor was different. There was sadness in her eyes. Disappointment rather than anger. Joy? I don't think I'm better than anyone. But I do think we all have a responsibility to be better than our worst impulses. Today, you chose to give in to yours. And now you're trying to make that choice my fault. She gathered her purse and turned to face the camera one final time. To the viewers at home, I apologize that what should have been a conversation about storytelling and art became something much uglier. That wasn't my intention when I agreed to come here today. Joy made one last pathetic attempt to regain control. Well, maybe next time you'll think twice before coming on a show where we ask real questions. Meryl paused at the edge of the set and delivered the final blow with devastating calm. Joy, the tragedy isn't that you ask difficult questions. The tragedy is that you think what you did here today qualifies as asking questions at all. Real journalism requires curiosity, preparation, and respect for both your subject and your audience. What you did was none of those things. As Meryl walked off the set, her heels clicking against the studio floor, the silence that followed was deafening. Joy sat there, her face pale, her hands trembling slightly, the full weight of her professional humiliation settling in. Whoopi looked directly into the camera with an expression that said everything about how the show's veteran host felt about what had just transpired. We'll be right back, Whoopi said quietly, and the cameras finally cut away, leaving Joy alone with the consequences of her own behavior and the knowledge that millions of viewers had just watched her get completely dismantled by one of the most respected actresses in the world. The confrontation was over, but the impact would be felt long after the cameras stopped rolling. Joy Behar had picked a fight with Meryl Streep and lost in the most public and devastating way possible, proving that sometimes when you try to tear someone down, you end up revealing far more about yourself than about your target. What did you think about this absolutely explosive confrontation? Have you ever seen a guest completely dismantle a host like this before? Drop your thoughts in the comments below.